In the aftermath of the most devastating divine judgment ever unleashed, Noah and his family disembarked from the ark onto a purified world. All tainted bloodlines had vanished, every giant wiped out, every remnant of the uprising that drove God to scour the earth with floodwaters erased completely. This marked humanity's fresh start, a renewed era under a covenant marked by the rainbow. God issued a direct command. Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Obey, and the human race would thrive. Yet, in just one generation, a single incident within the seclusion of a tent fractured that delicate new balance. This wasn't mere sibling rivalry or a petty lapse in ethics. It stood as the initial rebellion in the post-flood era, a decision that doomed whole nations, sparked conflicts enduring for thousands of years, and exposed a chilling reality. Even after God's wrathful purge, the human spirit gravitates toward revolt. The Bible documents it, and ancient Near Eastern writings underscore its severity. The fallout didn't remain confined to that tent. It reverberates across subsequent history. Once the waters subsided and the ark settled on Ararat's peaks, God addressed Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, with unmistakable orders. Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Far from optional advice, this was a sacred decree, echoing the very words given to Adam in Eden, now passed to the 8 survivors responsible for repeopling a scoured planet. All future nations, languages, and societies would stem from these 3 brothers: Shem, whose lineage would uphold the covenant; Japheth, whose offspring would expand to far-off shores; and Ham, Canaan's father, whose heritage would forever link to Defiance. God forged a covenant with Noah, vowing never again to annihilate all life with a flood, and placing the rainbow in the heavens as its token. He allowed meat-eating, while prohibiting blood consumption, since life dwells in the blood. He established human justice. Whoever spills human blood, by humans shall their blood be spilled. These weren't random edicts, but the bedrock for rebuilding society on godly principles, not the wicked schemes that triggered the deluge. Earth received another opportunity. Would people manage it better, or would old sinful patterns resurface? The response arrived quickly, from Noah's own family. Noah, the upright man who communed with God and endured the old world's destruction, turned to farming. Genesis 9:20 notes. He planted a vineyard, the Bible's first post-flood reference to winemaking. This held deep meaning. The vine symbolized society's revival, farming's return, and humanity's return to planting and reaping cycles. Yet Scripture consistently shows wine's double edge: blessing in moderation, disorder in excess. Noah partook of his vineyard's produce, got intoxicated, and lay exposed in his tent. What followed unfolded privately, without spectators, heavenly proclamations, or angelic appearances. A vulnerable episode for the patriarch whose faithfulness saved humankind. But seclusion doesn't lessen impact. Ham, father of Canaan, went into the tent and beheld his father's nakedness. The Hebrew term ra'ah erwat packs a punch beyond mild English renderings. Later, Levitical laws and other ancient Near Eastern codes employ the same phrase, not just for glancing, but for shaming or violating paternal authority, akin to symbolic or literal undermining of power. Certain rabbinic interpreters claim Ham mocked him. Others propose graver acts like meddling, deliberate exposure, or seizing forbidden dominance. Undeniably, Ham failed to shield his father's honor. Instead, he stepped out and informed his brothers, spreading the disgrace. Shem and Japheth acted otherwise. They grabbed a cloth, entered backward, and draped it over Noah without gazing at him, an intentional display of respect that undid Ham's deed. Upon waking and hearing what his youngest son had inflicted, Noah didn't brush it aside or call it boyish folly. He issued a curse, not straight on Ham but on Canaan. Quote, _1__. This prophetic decree wasn't blind fury. It fixed the course of peoples forever. Ham's choice in that tent has long been toned down in simplified Sunday school versions. People usually downplay the story as just a mishap. A son who happens to catch sight of his dad's nakedness and blurts it out to his brothers in naive surprise. That's it, they say. Yet the Bible doesn't portray it that way. Noah's reaction points to far more than embarrassment over a small slip-up. The curse he issues holds the force of divine prophecy. Plus, the Hebrew wording itself calls for a deeper look. The expression ___, quote, __2__, shows up repeatedly in Leviticus, always meaning purposeful wrongdoing, not some casual glimpse. It's a boundary cross that undermined the father's honor and leadership. Folks in ancient Near Eastern societies grasped this nuance that escapes many today. A patriarch's nakedness went beyond bare skin. It symbolized weakness, a brief lapse in command when someone might seize or undermine power. Ham didn't just come across Noah by chance and slip away discreetly. He looked. He took it in. Then he stepped out and shared it with his brothers, not out of worry, but in a way that spurred Shem and Japheth to act with intentional respect, backing in to cover him without risking a glance at what Ham had already spilled. Their careful moves highlight the seriousness of Ham's actions. They knew it wasn't mere chit-chat. It was a direct insult to the family head who bridged God's promise with the world's renewal. Certain Jewish teachings push it even harder, claiming Ham didn't stop at looking, that he ridiculed Noah's state, or worse, pulled off something so outrageous, the Bible music shrouds the full extent. Physical or not, symbolic or literal, the exact deed mattered less than its meaning. The initial post-flood revolt against proper rule. Ham had received a fresh start on earth, charged with populating it under God's design. But inside that tent he picked rebellion. He shamed instead of shielding. He sneered rather than showed respect. This wasn't kid stuff out of idle wonder. Ham was an adult, a dad in his own right. His choice was calculated. When Noah woke and learned what went down, he delivered a verdict rippling across ages. The curse skipped Ham and hit Canaan, his boy, mirroring a biblical theme that keeps recurring. Disobedience spawns tainted family lines, and the fallout from revolt doesn't stop at one person. It spreads through descendants, molding entire people's paths. Why target Canaan over Ham? That's puzzled scholars for ages. The explanation uncovers a core biblical truth. Rebellion doesn't just taint the rebel. It launches a generational spiritual path. Ham's tent moment wasn't a standalone slip. It sowed rebellion's seed, music, into the new human era, sprouting in his offspring. Canaan embodied that doom. His lineage's nations would forever clash with God's chosen. The curse was precise. Music. A servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. No vague oppression here. The Hebrew Ebed Avadim marks the rock-bottom rung in the social ladder, serving even the servers. This forecast defined Canaanite ties to Shem's and Japheth's descendants across Scripture's timeline, and the Bible tracks exactly how it played out. Canaanites razed cities epitomizing all the flood aimed to wipe away. Sodom and Gomorrah, sinful enough for heaven's fire. Jericho, toppled as Israel got orders to wipe out everyone inside. The Philistines' 5 strongholds, endless foes of God's nation. These weren't chance hotspots rubbing Israel wrong. They embodied the curse from Canaan's dad's revolt. Their ways, sacrificing kids to Molech, sacred sex work, fortune-telling, forbidden crop mixing, banned in Leviticus, weren't quirky customs. They sprang from a moral rot, linking straight music to that tent. Not many ponder the real dynamic behind Noah's curse on Canaan. He wasn't lashing out at music some blameless kid for his dad's fault. He pinpointed where Ham's defiant spirit would embed and flourish. Canaan got not only Ham's music bloodline, but that same bent toward scorning leaders and exposing what deserved protection. This mindset would shape the very nations descended from him. Centuries later, when Israel arrived in the Promised Land, they weren't seizing empty ground. They were carrying out divine justice against populations whose way of life had turned into a total rebellion against the structure God set up right after the flood. The curse on Canaan wasn't some act of spite. It was a foretelling. History confirmed it over and over without fail. From that doomed family line sprang peoples whose names stood for nothing less than defiance of God's promises. The Canaanites stood out from other ancient groups, vying for space. They were the living legacy of the path Ham kicked off by shaming his dad inside that tent. Places like Sodom, Gomorrah, Jericho, Tyre, and Sidon turned into hubs for rituals so vile that God ordered their total wipeout. Far from overstepping, this was judgment coming due, foretold long before those cities rose. Canaanite religion exposed just how rotten it all was. Offering kids to Molech wasn't random cruelty. It was core to their faith. Moms and dads would lay squirming babies on the scorching metal statues' outstretched hands as pounding drums masked the cries. Sacred prostitution, men and women alike, twisted sex into magic to sway gods of abundance. Necromancy, pacts with evil spirits, blurring lines God kept distinct. People with beasts, pure with impure, holy with filthy. The laws in Leviticus didn't dream up bans on this stuff out of nowhere. They targeted what Canaanites had made standard in their temples. Today's audience cringes at God's order for Israel to purge the Canaanites, smash their shrines, and topple their idols, seeing only harshness. But the Bible frames it another way. These weren't blameless folks collateral in a land grab. Their whole society rested on flipping God's blueprint upside down, the same flip that started with Ham bearing instead of shielding, jeering instead of respecting, rebelling instead of yielding. Noah's curse had warned Canaan would end up serving others. By rejecting that fate and becoming Israel's endless foes, they locked in the course his prophecy laid out. The cycle didn't stop at the first takeover. Whenever Israel mixed with Canaanite ways, disaster struck. Solomon's foreign brides smuggled their gods straight into Jerusalem. Jezebel from Phoenician Tyre in Canaanite lands almost stamped out Yahweh worship under King Ahab. The prophets saved their fiercest fury not for outsiders like Assyria or Babylon, but for Israel's embrace of Canaanite sins. Why? Canaan posed a deadlier risk than armies. It was the Flood-era revolt, reborn as a full-blown alternative faith, dangling prosperity, strength, and secrets via paths God had flat-out banned. Ethnicity didn't doom the Canaanites. Their spirit, the very one that triggered the curse, did. Ham's move in Noah's tent didn't create their wickedness. It spotlighted where that evil would gather and spread. Fire raining on Sodom, Jericho's walls tumbling, Israel clearing the land. These weren't fresh verdicts. They were carrying out the penalty declared the instant Noah woke up and grasped his youngest son's betrayal. What Ham did in that tent wasn't a one-off that faded after the curse. It was humanity's fresh start cracking at the base, a split growing wider across generations until Babel shattered it wide. The Bible lays out the thread with stark precision. One guy's stand against his father's rule plants the seed for whole societies, defying heaven's rule. It traces straight. Ham begat Cush, Cush begat Nimrod. Nimrod launched the first post-flood kingdom, the great hunter before the Lord, a title hinting at revolt. Genesis 10:8-10 paints him as a gibber, a mighty one, echoing the flood-era Nephilim giants. Before the Lord translates Lifnei Yahweh, which sounds neutral but hints at in the face of or against God. Nimrod's empire started in Babel and grew into Assyria, where he founded Nineveh, cities that would later stand as symbols of structured opposition to God's will. This was no accident. It marked the expansion of the rebellion that ignited in Noah's tent, now amplified to the scale of entire societies. God had instructed Noah's family to populate the earth, to disperse, reproduce, and spread out worldwide. Nimrod rallied people to defy that completely. He pulled them together in a single location. He imposed unified control. He launched the building of a tower, not for simple construction, but as an act of revolt against the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, so we won't be scattered abroad. That was outright rejection of God's decree. And the force behind it links straight back through Cush to Ham. The disrespect toward Noah had ballooned into disrespect toward God. Failing to cover up turned into refusing to submit. Opting to reveal instead of shield evolved into a group resolve to seize godly rights via human invention. The tower stood as mankind's initial coordinated bid for self-rule apart from God, relying on cleverness alone, bricks in place of stone. Tara's mortar, man's creations replacing God's gifts. Its goal wasn't reverence, it was self-reliance, a tribute to human power, a bold claim that people no longer depended on God's promises or rules. They would forge their own legacy, they would fight dispersal, they would band together under mortal rule and accomplish through group ambition what God had prohibited. This was Ham's rebellion etched massively across Shinar's flatlands. Nimrod designed it. God struck back fast. He muddled their speech and drove apart what Nimrod had assembled. Yet the harm lingered. Babel's essence, the drive to consolidate against God, to climb to the skies by mortal means, to claim power outside God's design, didn't vanish with the tower's collapse. It spread with the divided groups, rooting deep in every culture that valued human success over yielding to God. From Babylon to Rome and every self-reliant empire after, the cycle endures. And it didn't start at Nimrod's tower, but with Ham's decision in that tent, swapping protection for exposure and respect for revolt. Noah's tent episode isn't mere inebriation. It's not petty family squabble or outdated rituals. It's the instant when humanity's fresh start started cracking. The flood had wiped out the corruption that triggered God's wrath. The ark had saved 8 lives. The covenant was sealed. God issued clear orders. Quote, 11. Yet in just one generation, within the seclusion of one tent, that structure faced assault. Ham witnessed his father's weakness and picked revelation over shielding, mockery over respect, publicizing over safeguarding. That wasn't mere fleeting nosiness. It was calculated rebellion against the family head, who bridged God's orders and mankind's path forward. The curse that ensued wasn't random vengeance. It prophetically pinpointed where that rebellion would gather and flourish. Canaan carried the burden because his descendants would personify that very spirit. The peoples from his lineage, Sodom, Jericho, Tyre, didn't stumble into ways that clashed with God's standards by chance. They codified the exact perversion of godly order that sparked when Ham skipped covering what demanded protection. Child offerings, sacred prostitution, consulting spirits of the dead. These weren't just local quirks. They flowed inevitably from revolt that spurned fatherly rule and, ultimately, God's own rule. The trend didn't stop at Canaanite strongholds. It intensified. Ham's descendants birthed Nimrod, who collected what God meant to disperse, who erected where God barred clustering, who spearheaded mankind's debut collective stand against heaven's command at Babel. A lone dishonor in a tent planted the kernel of society-spanning uprising. The tower crumbled, tongues tangled, nations parted. But Babel's fueling spirit, the push for human independence via grouped revolt, persisted in all later empires. Scripture doesn't present these as isolated ethics tales. It follows a lineage of defiance from Noah's tent to Shinar's fields, Jericho's walls, Sodom's alleys. The biggest uprisings don't launch with troops or realms. They stem from one hidden choice that resounds forever. Ham's call forged the fate of whole peoples. Throughout Scripture's record, the curse declared on Canaan unfolded with unyielding accuracy. The cautionary message in this narrative endures to this day. Rebellion against God's ordained structure, once embraced, refuses to stay isolated. It spreads across lineages, erects flawed regimes, and inevitably invites the precise reckoning it was designed to evade.